It was a bright Tuesday morning in Greenfield, Iowa. The small town was buzzing with excitement as former President Donald Trump's motorcade pulled up to the Liberty Diner, a local favorite known for its homemade apple pie and friendly service. American flags hung from lampposts along Main Street, and a crowd had gathered outside the restaurant hours before his scheduled appearance. Inside, staff had prepared for the visit, cleaning every surface until it shone. Regular customers sat alongside curious visitors, all waiting to catch a glimpse of the former president. The diner was filled to capacity, with the smell of fresh coffee and bacon hanging in the air. At exactly 11:30 a.m., Trump entered through the front door, surrounded by Secret Service agents in dark suits. He wore his trademark navy suit and red tie, waving to the crowd as camera flashes lit up the room. People stood up, clapping and reaching out to shake his hand as he moved through the narrow path cleared for him. "Great place you have here," Trump said to Martha, the diner's owner, who beamed with pride as she showed him to the counter where he was scheduled to meet select community members for the next 30 minutes. Trump's visit was following the carefully planned schedule that his campaign team had prepared. His aide, James Wilson, stayed close by, occasionally checking his watch and whispering reminders about their next stop in Des Moines later that afternoon. Halfway through the planned meet and greet, Trump paused. His eyes had caught something, or rather, someone, in the corner of the diner. Sitting quietly by the window was a man in a wheelchair, wearing a faded camouflage jacket despite the warm weather. A veteran's cap sat on his head, decorated with pins from his service years. The man, Michael Reeves, had not come for the political event. He had simply wanted breakfast at his regular spot, not realizing the diner would be hosting such a high-profile visitor that day. He sat alone, watching the commotion while sipping his coffee, trying not to draw attention to himself. Something changed in Trump's expression. Without warning, he stepped away from the planned route and began walking toward Michael's table. His security team tensed up, exchanging worried glances as they scrambled to adjust their positions. James, the aide, looked down at his clipboard with concern. "Sir, we have the schedule to keep," James whispered, but Trump waved him off. The diner fell silent as everyone watched. Phones came out to record what was happening. Michael looked up, surprised to see the former president approaching his table. "You served?" Trump asked, pointing to Michael's cap. "Yes, sir. 3 tours in Afghanistan. 82nd Airborne," Michael replied, his voice steady but quiet. Trump extended his hand, and Michael shook it firmly. Then, to everyone's surprise, Trump pulled out the empty chair across from Michael and sat down. "Tell me your story," he said, not as a politician but as one person speaking to another. The security team formed a wider perimeter. James stood nearby, clearly calculating how this unplanned detour would affect the rest of the day's events. The other diners watched in amazement, some standing on tiptoes to get a better view of what was happening in the corner. No one expected what would happen next, least of all Michael Reeves, who had come to the Liberty Diner that morning simply looking for a quiet breakfast, not knowing that his life was about to change forever. Michael Reeves shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair as the former president sat across from him. The diner remained unusually quiet, with only the soft clink of silverware and the hiss of the coffee machine breaking the silence. Michael hadn't planned to share his story with anyone today, especially not with Donald Trump, and certainly not with dozens of strangers watching their every move. "I joined up right after high school," Michael began, his voice low but clear. "Didn't have much going for me in this town. The Army gave me purpose." Trump nodded, listening without interrupting. His security team stood at a respectful distance, though they remained alert. One agent spoke quietly into his wrist microphone, likely updating the team about the schedule change. "My first 2 tours went fine. Got some medals, made some friends." Michael paused, looking down at his coffee cup. "Third tour was different. Our convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar." As Michael spoke, Martha, the diner owner, quietly approached and refilled both men's coffee cups. She gave Michael's shoulder a gentle squeeze before stepping away. Everyone in Greenfield knew pieces of Michael's story, but few had heard him tell it fully. "Woke up in Germany with no legs below the knees," Michael continued, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "That was 18 months ago. Been fighting the VA system ever since." Trump leaned forward. "What's happening with your benefits?" Michael explained how his disability paperwork had been lost twice. how he had to drive 3 hours to the nearest VA hospital that could handle this specialized care, how the prosthetics he needed required approval from 5 different departments. His wife Sarah had quit her nursing job to help care for him, leaving them with mounting bills and a mortgage they could barely afford. The worst part isn't the legs, Michael said, tapping the arm of his wheelchair. It's feeling forgotten, like what we did over there didn't matter to anyone. As Michael spoke, Trump's expression changed. The campaign smile was gone, replaced by something more genuine, a look of concern mixed with growing anger. We've been waiting 8 months for my benefits to come through, Michael continued. The mortgage is 3 months behind. Sarah's trying to work night shifts now, but with the kids and my appointments. He trailed off, embarrassed to be sharing such personal struggles. Across the diner, phones recorded the conversation, but Michael didn't care anymore. It felt good to finally tell someone who might actually be able to do something. The kids. How old? Trump asked. Emma's 7, Jack's 5, Michael replied, a small smile breaking through as he reached for his wallet and pulled out a worn photo. They're good kids. Emma wants to be a doctor now because of what happened to me. Trump took the photo, studied it for a moment, then handed it back. Smart girl, she'll do it too. The campaign aide approached cautiously, tapping his watch. Trump waved him off again, more firmly this time. Your country owes you better than this, Trump said, his voice rising enough that others in the diner could hear. Several people nodded in agreement, regardless of their political views. Michael hadn't expected this. He'd come for breakfast, not to become the center of attention or to have his struggles aired publicly. Yet there was something freeing about finally speaking his truth, about having someone with power actually listen. Sir, Michael said, straightening his posture as much as possible, I don't want special treatment. I just want the system to work like it's supposed to, not just for me, but for all of us who served. Trump's eyes narrowed slightly, as they often did when he was thinking deeply about something. The campaign schedule, the political implications, the cameras recording every word, all of it seemed forgotten as he made a decision that would surprise everyone in the room. The campaign aide, James Wilson, hovered nervously near Trump's shoulder. The meticulously planned schedule was now completely off track. What was supposed to be a 30-minute photo opportunity had already stretched to 45 minutes, and the former president showed no signs of wrapping up his conversation with Michael Reeves. Sir, James whispered, leaning down. The mayor is waiting, and we have the fundraiser in Des Moines at 3. Trump turned to him with an expression that made James step back. Tell them I'll be delayed. This is more important. The diner was still unusually quiet, with everyone straining to hear the conversation. Sarah, the waitress who had worked at Liberty Diner for 15 years, brought over 2 slices of apple pie without being asked. She set them down carefully, giving Michael a warm smile before walking away. Best pie in Iowa, Trump said, picking up his fork. Now tell me exactly what happened with your paperwork. Michael looked surprised at the specific question. Politicians usually offered vague promises or sympathetic nods, not detailed inquiries. They lost my medical records during the transfer from the military hospital to the VA system, Michael explained. Then when we resubmitted everything, they said I needed additional evaluations to prove my disability was service-connected. He gave a short, bitter laugh. As if losing my legs somewhere else would have been more likely. Trump's face darkened. He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket and grabbed a paper napkin. Give me names, he said. Who have you been dealing with? Which office? Michael hesitated only briefly before sharing details he had memorized through countless phone calls and office visits. The regional VA director's name, his case manager, the office location in Des Moines, his claim number. Trump wrote it all down on the napkin, his handwriting bold and slanting. He asked follow-up questions that showed he understood the system's complexities. Questions about Form 21526EZ, about disability ratings, about the appeals process. The other diners watched in amazement. This wasn't the campaign speech they had expected. This was something entirely different. My buddy Tom had similar problems, said an older man 2 tables over, unable to stay quiet any longer. Took him 3 years to get his benefits after serving in Iraq. Trump looked up. How many veterans do we have here today? 6 hands went up around the diner. Any of you having trouble with the VA? Trump asked. 4 hands stayed raised. Trump turned back to Michael. This isn't right. Not for you, not for any of them. He stabbed at the pie with his fork but didn't eat it. The system is broken, and nobody seems to care enough to fix it. Michael nodded. Most politicians visit the VA hospitals for photo ops, but nothing changes. I'm not most politicians, Trump replied, a hint of his familiar confidence returning. Martha, the diner owner, approached their table with a fresh pot of coffee. My husband waited 9 months for a simple knee surgery at the VA, she added as she refilled their cups. By then, he could barely walk. The conversation had transformed. What began as a private exchange between two men was evolving into something like a town hall meeting, with other veterans and family members sharing their experiences. Trump listened to each one, asking questions, taking more notes. James the aide was now on his phone, frantically rearranging the day's schedule. The Secret Service agents had adjusted their positions to accommodate the changing situation, though they looked increasingly uncomfortable with the unplanned, unpredictable nature of the event. Michael watched it all unfold with a mixture of hope and skepticism. He'd heard promises before, yet something about this felt different. The focused questions, the specific details Trump wanted, the growing anger in the former president's voice as he heard more stories. What happens next? Michael finally asked, looking Trump directly in the eyes. The room fell silent again, everyone waiting for the answer to that simple but powerful question. Trump pushed his untouched pie aside and stood up suddenly. The Secret Service agents tensed, moving closer as if expecting trouble. The diner fell completely silent. Even the sizzling from the kitchen seemed to pause. "Can I have everyone's attention?" Trump said, his voice carrying easily through the small space. He didn't need to ask twice. All eyes were already on him. Michael looked up from his wheelchair, unsure what was happening. He hadn't wanted to create a scene. His wife Sarah would probably scold him later for drawing so much attention to their problems. "I want to tell you all something," Trump continued, placing one hand on Michael's shoulder. "This man gave everything for our country. He didn't just risk his life. He lost parts of it. And how do we thank him? With paperwork and delays and excuses." Phones recorded the unexpected speech from every angle. The campaign aide, James, had given up on his schedule and now stood to the side, texting rapidly. Michael Reeves served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He came home with no legs and a family to support, Trump said, his voice growing louder. And now he can't get the benefits he earned because some bureaucrat lost his paperwork. Twice. Murmurs of agreement spread through the diner. Several people nodded, including veterans who had shared their own stories earlier. "This isn't a Democrat or Republican issue," Trump continued, surprising many in the room. "This is an American issue. When our warriors come home broken, we fix them. We don't break them more with red tape." Martha wiped tears from her eyes as she stood by the counter. Her late husband had faced similar struggles after Vietnam. Trump turned to face Michael directly. "Here's what I'm going to do. Not what I'm going to try to do, or what I hope to do. What I'm going to do." The room seemed to hold its collective breath. "First, I'm giving you my personal cell phone number," Trump said, taking out a business card and writing on the back of it, "Not my office, not my staff, my direct line." He handed the card to Michael, who took it with slightly trembling hands. "Second, I'm assigning my best person to your case," Trump continued, gesturing to a woman standing near the door who looked surprised to be called out. "Linda Torres worked at the VA for 15 years before joining my team. She knows how to cut through the nonsense." Linda stepped forward, nodding professionally to Michael. "Third," Trump said, his voice rising again, "I'm calling the VA secretary today. Not next week, not when it's convenient. Today." The diner erupted in applause. Even people who hadn't voted for Trump were standing, clapping for the direct action and clear commitment. Michael stared at the business card in his hand, looking slightly overwhelmed. "Sir, I appreciate this, but I don't want special treatment just because we happen to meet." Trump raised his hand to quiet the room. "You're right, and that's the most important part. This isn't just about you, Michael." He turned to address the entire diner again. "What happened to Michael is happening to veterans all across America. So I'm making another promise right now. We're going to use Michael's case to expose every broken part of this system. And then we're going to fix it, not with more bureaucracy, but with less." The campaign aide was now frantically signaling that they needed to leave. pointing dramatically at his watch. The mayor of Greenfield had arrived and was waiting by the door, looking confused about the change in plans. Trump ignored them all. "Linda will stay here with you, Michael. Get her everything she needs. All your paperwork, all your contacts at the VA. By this time next week, we'll have action, not excuses." He extended his hand, and Michael shook it firmly. The veteran's eyes showed something that had been missing when Trump first sat down: hope. As cameras flashed and the diner buzzed with excitement, nobody realized that this unplanned 20-minute conversation would soon change far more than just Michael Reeves' life. The black SUV sped down the highway toward Des Moines, now running 90 minutes behind schedule. Inside the lead vehicle, Trump was on his phone, his voice carrying through the car despite the road noise. "No, not next week. Today," he said firmly, ignoring James' anxious glances from the seat opposite. "I just met a veteran who lost both legs in Afghanistan, and he's been waiting 8 months for his benefits. 8 months." Linda Torrey sat beside James, furiously taking notes on her tablet. She had stayed behind at the diner for an additional hour, gathering all of Michael's information and making copies of his paperwork at the local library. Now she was catching up with the motorcade, already formulating a plan of action. "Sir," she said when Trump ended his call, "I've reviewed Michael's initial file. The main problem seems to be that his records were classified under the wrong service number." Trump shook his head in disgust. "A typo? That's why this man can't feed his family?" "Essentially, yes," Linda confirmed. "But fixing it requires authorization from 3 different departments." Trump made another call, this time to Senator Marshall Hayes, a longtime ally who served on the Veterans Affairs Committee. The conversation was brief but intense, with Trump extracting a promise for direct intervention. James leaned over to Linda and whispered, "Is this going to be a problem? The campaign isn't supposed to get involved in individual cases like this." Linda gave him a look that silenced him immediately. "This isn't about the campaign anymore," she said quietly. By the time they reached the Des Moines hotel where the fundraiser was scheduled, Trump had made 7 calls. The VA secretary had promised to personally review Michael's case. Senator Hayes had assigned his chief of staff to monitor progress. The regional VA director in Iowa was suddenly very interested in expediting a case that had languished for months. In the hotel lobby, while donors waited in the ballroom upstairs, Trump pulled Linda aside. "I want daily updates on Michael's case," he instructed. "And I want you to find 10 more veterans in similar situations. Not for publicity. Don't tell the press about this. I want to understand exactly where the system is failing." Linda nodded, somewhat surprised by the direction. "Should I coordinate with the campaign team?" "No," Trump replied firmly. "This isn't a campaign issue. This is fixing a broken promise America made to its warriors." James overheard this exchange and looked even more worried. The schedule, the media strategy, the carefully crafted campaign narrative, all were being pushed aside for this unexpected mission. 3 days later, Michael Reeves received a call from the VA hospital in Des Moines. His records had been found, reviewed, and approved. The disability benefits would be processed immediately and backdated to his discharge date. Furthermore, the specialized prosthetics he had been fighting to get approved were now authorized. Michael sat in his kitchen, staring at the phone in disbelief after hanging up. Sarah rushed in from the living room, having overheard parts of the conversation. "What happened?" she asked, hope and fear battling in her expression. "They approved everything," Michael said slowly. "All of it. They're even sending a driver to take me to my appointments in Des Moines." Sarah collapsed into a chair across from him, tears streaming down her face. "How? We've been fighting this for months." Michael shook his head, still processing the sudden change in their fortunes. "The woman I spoke with said my case had been flagged at the highest level, whatever that means." Meanwhile, in a hotel suite in Michigan, Linda placed a stack of folders on the table in front of Trump. "Michael's case is resolved," she reported. "Benefits approved, medical equipment authorized, transportation arranged." Trump nodded, satisfied but not surprised. "And the others?" Linda opened the top folder. "We've identified 12 veterans with similar issues. 3 in Pennsylvania, 2 in Michigan, 4 in Wisconsin, and 3 in Florida." Trump's eyes narrowed at the mention of these key electoral states, but his focus remained on the individual stories, not their political implications. Start with the worst case, he said, reaching for the first folder, and get me on the phone with whoever is blocking their benefits. The campaign staff exchanged glances as their candidate disappeared into another night of phone calls that had nothing to do with winning votes. The small office of the Iowa Regional VA Center buzzed with unusual activity. Staff members moved quickly between desks, carrying files and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. For the past week, the normally quiet government office had been operating at a pace no one had seen before. "Did you finish the Reeves paperwork?" asked Janet Morrison, the office supervisor, as she stopped by Mark Peterson's desk. Mark had been handling veterans' claims for 12 years and had never seen pressure like this. "Just sent it upstairs for final approval," Mark replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "All benefits backdated as requested. The prosthetics authorization went through yesterday." Janet nodded, checking Michael's name off her list. "Good. We have 11 more priority cases to complete by Friday." Throughout the building, similar conversations were happening. What normally took months was being processed in days. Staff members were authorized to work overtime, bureaucratic hurdles were being bypassed, and managers who typically rejected claims were now finding reasons to approve them. At his desk, Mark clicked through Michael's file one more time to ensure everything was complete. The medical records that had been lost twice before had mysteriously appeared in the system 3 days ago, properly labeled and organized. The senior medical officer who had insisted on additional evaluations had suddenly determined that the existing documentation was sufficient. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" asked Diane from the next desk over. She had been processing claims for even longer than Mark. "Never," Mark admitted. "Something big must have happened." What they didn't know was that the VA secretary himself had called their regional director twice daily for updates on Michael's case. The director, in turn, had made it very clear to every department head that delays would not be tolerated. 3 weeks after Trump's visit to the Liberty Diner, Michael Reeves sat in the office of Dr. Samuel Chen, one of the top prosthetic specialists in the Midwest. In normal circumstances, getting an appointment with Dr. Chen took months. Michael had been scheduled within days. "These new prosthetics will give you much more mobility," Dr. Chen explained, showing Michael detailed diagrams. "They're designed specifically for your activity level and body type." Michael nodded, still somewhat dazed by how quickly everything was happening. "How soon can we start the fitting process?" "We can take measurements today," Dr. Chen replied. "The fabrication will take about 2 weeks. We're putting you at the top of the list." As Michael left the medical center that afternoon, he noticed a black SUV parked near his van. A woman stepped out, Linda Torres, the aide Trump had assigned to his case. "Mr. Reeves," she called, walking toward him. "Do you have a minute?" They sat on a bench outside the medical building. Linda had a tablet with her and began to check off items from a list. "Benefits are approved and payments have started, correct?" she asked. "Yes," Michael confirmed. "We received the first deposit yesterday. The back pay will come next week." "And the medical equipment?" "Dr. Chen is starting the process today, 2 weeks for the new prosthetics." Linda nodded, making notes. "How about the home modifications? Has anyone contacted you about adapting your house?" Michael looked surprised. "No, I didn't even know that was happening." "It's been approved," Linda explained. "A contractor will call you tomorrow. They'll install ramps, widen doorways, and modify your bathroom to make everything more accessible." Michael shook his head in amazement. "All this happened because I happened to be having breakfast when Trump visited." Linda looked up from her tablet. "Yes and no. You were the catalyst, but what's happening now is much bigger than your case. The system is being forced to change." She showed him something on her tablet, a spreadsheet with dozens of names. "These are other veterans with similar issues. Every one of them is now getting the same treatment you are." Back at the VA office, Mark Peterson was just leaving work when his phone rang. It was his brother-in-law, a veteran living in Pennsylvania. "You won't believe what happened," his brother-in-law said excitedly. "I got a call from the VA today. They're expediting my claim, after 3 years of waiting." Mark stopped walking, realization dawning. "Did someone from the former president's team contact you?" "How did you know?" his brother-in-law asked, surprised. Mark smiled as he looked back at the office building, still lit up with workers processing claims well into the evening. just a hunch. 2 months after the chance meeting at Liberty Diner, Michael Reeves sat in his living room watching the evening news. His new prosthetic legs were propped against the sofa. He had been using them for 3 weeks now, slowly building strength and confidence. The physical therapist visited twice weekly, and Michael could already walk short distances with the help of parallel bars. "You need to see this," Sarah called from the kitchen, where she was preparing dinner. The local news was running a story about veterans' benefits. On screen, a reporter stood outside the Iowa Regional VA Center. In an unprecedented development, processing times for veterans' disability claims have dropped by 60% in the last 6 weeks. Sources inside the VA attribute this to a new directive from Washington. The camera cut to an interview with a veteran named Thomas Miller from Cedar Rapids. "I waited 2 years for my claim to be processed. Then suddenly last month, I got a call saying everything was approved. I don't know what changed, but something definitely did." Michael reached for his phone and took a picture of the TV screen. He sent it to Linda Torres with a simple message. "Is this because of what happened with me?" Linda's reply came quickly. "Yes, and it's not just Iowa anymore." The next morning, Michael's story appeared in the Des Moines Register. A reporter had tracked down details of Trump's visit to Liberty Diner and the subsequent changes at the VA. The headline read, "How One Veteran's Chance Encounter Sparked System-Wide Reform." The article included quotes from VA employees speaking anonymously about the sudden pressure to resolve backlogged cases. It mentioned 12 other veterans across 4 states who had experienced similar expedited processing of long-delayed claims. By noon, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. Veterans across the country began calling VA offices, asking if their claims could be reviewed too. VA phone lines were overwhelmed. In Washington, D.C., Congressman James Hartwell, chair of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, called an emergency meeting. 24 representatives gathered in a conference room on Capitol Hill, evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. "We've been embarrassed into action," Hartwell admitted to the group. "A former president accomplished in 6 weeks what we couldn't do in 6 years." Across town, current administration officials were holding their own meeting about the situation. The VA secretary faced tough questions about why it took outside intervention to fix problems they had promised to address. "The system was designed to move slowly," the secretary explained defensively. "Careful review takes time." "Tell that to Michael Reeves," said the chief of staff, sliding a copy of the Washington Post across the table. The front page story featured a photo of Michael standing on his new prosthetic legs with Sarah and their children beside him. By the end of the week, both political parties were scrambling to propose new legislation for VA reform. Bills that had languished in committees for years were suddenly being fast-tracked. Representatives who had ignored veterans' issues were now championing them, aware of the growing media attention. In the small town of Greenfield, Michael's phone rang constantly with calls from veterans seeking advice, reporters wanting interviews, and politicians asking for endorsements. He declined most requests, uncomfortable with the attention. When Linda Torres called to ask if he would consider speaking at a veterans rally in Des Moines, Michael surprised himself by saying yes. "People need to know what's possible," he told Sarah that evening as they sat on their newly installed front porch ramp. "If my story can help others, I should tell it." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Just tell them the truth. How one person decided to actually listen instead of just talking." 2 days later, Michael stood at a podium before 500 veterans and their families. His new prosthetic legs were hidden under his pants, but everyone knew his story. As he began to speak, the room fell silent. "I'm not here to talk politics," Michael said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm here because something broke in our system, and now we have a chance to fix it. Not just for me, for all of us." The crowd erupted in applause, and a movement that began with a chance breakfast meeting continued to grow. 6 months after the meeting at Liberty Diner, Michael Reeves adjusted his tie as he sat in the waiting area outside the congressional hearing room. He had never imagined himself testifying before Congress. The marble hallways and important people rushing past made him feel out of place in his new suit, bought specially for this occasion. "You ready for this?" asked Thomas Miller, the veteran from Cedar Rapids who had become a close friend through their shared experiences. Thomas would be testifying too, along with 3 other veterans whose cases had been expedited in the wake of Michael's story. As ready as I'll ever be, Michael replied, checking his prepared statement one more time. Inside the packed hearing room, members of the House Veterans Affairs Committee sat behind a long curved desk. The gallery was filled with reporters, veterans advocates, and VA officials. In the front row sat former President Donald Trump, who had arrived with little fanfare just minutes earlier. When Michael's name was called, he walked to the witness table without his wheelchair for the first time in public. His gait was slightly uneven but steady. A murmur of appreciation ran through the room as people noted this visible sign of his progress. "Mr. Reeves, please begin your testimony," said Congressman Hartwell, leaning toward his microphone. Michael took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I was a forgotten veteran. Today, I'm walking again and my family is no longer facing financial ruin. But I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here because thousands of other veterans are still waiting for the help they've earned. For the next 5 minutes, Michael shared not only his story, but the stories of dozens of veterans he had met since his case gained attention. He described the broken processes, the lost paperwork, the endless delays, and the toll it took on veterans and their families. The system doesn't need more money, Michael concluded. It needs more accountability and less bureaucracy. What happened in my case proves that the VA can work quickly when there's enough pressure. But veterans shouldn't need to meet a former president to get the benefits they've earned. When Michael finished, the room was completely silent. Then, starting from the back, people began to applaud. Soon, everyone was standing, Democrats and Republicans alike, giving him an ovation that lasted nearly a minute. As the applause faded, Congressman Hartwell spoke. "Mr. Reeves, your testimony has been invaluable. I'm pleased to announce that after working across the aisle, we have reached agreement on the Veterans Processing Reform Act, which addresses many of the issues you've raised today. The partisan bill, which would later pass with overwhelming support, simplified the claims process, established strict timelines for processing, created an emergency review system for cases with financial hardship, and increased penalties for VA administrators who failed to meet these standards." After the hearing, Michael found himself face to face with Trump in the hallway outside. "You did good in there," Trump said, shaking Michael's hand. "How are the new legs working out?" "Getting better every day," Michael replied. "My daughter says I'll be running by Christmas." Trump laughed. "I believe her. That's one smart kid you got." As they talked, senators and representatives from both parties approached to introduce themselves and discuss the new legislation. Michael realized that his story had done something rare in Washington. It brought people together around a cause that transcended political divisions. Later that evening, as Michael flew home to Iowa, he thought about how much had changed since that morning at Liberty Diner. His personal situation had improved dramatically, but the greater satisfaction came from knowing that thousands of other veterans would benefit from the reforms now moving forward. When the plane landed in Des Moines, Sarah and the children were waiting. Emma ran to them first, throwing her arms around his waist. "Did you fix it, Dad?" she asked, her 7-year-old face serious. "Did you fix it for all the soldiers?" Michael lifted her up, his new prosthetics sturdy beneath him. "Not by myself, kiddo, but I think we all started something important." As they walked through the airport together, Michael on his own 2 feet, a few people recognized him and nodded in respect. He wasn't a celebrity or a politician. He was just a veteran who had been given a chance to make a difference, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the simplest human connection, one person truly listening to another.